Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This white paper is the most detailed blueprint that any people have ever been offered anywhere in the world as a basis for becoming an independent country. It puts beyond doubt that an independent Scotland would start from a position of strength. In fact, we become independent in more promising circumstances than virtually any other nation in history. Now, that reflects our underlying economic strength. An independent Scotland could have the 8th highest economic output and the 10th highest national income per head of population in the whole of the developed world. We have contributed more in taxes per person than the rest of the UK for every single one of the last 32 years. But it also reflects our vast potential as a country. We have world-class universities, huge expertise in engineering and life sciences, an astounding cultural heritage, immense energy and natural resources, and a skilled and inventive people. With independence, we could have the powers and responsibilities we need to seize opportunities, to build a wealthier and fairer nation, but also to face our major challenges. Because we'll also have to tackle a legacy of debt, of low growth, of social inequality bequeathed to us by Westminster control of our economy. To break out of that cycle requires the ability and powers to mobilise and invest in our natural and human resources. We have huge hydrocarbon resources for the next half-century, but we need to build renewable wealth which will last forever. We need to transform childcare provision to unleash the full potential of all of our population. We need to develop the productivity and competitive advantage which ensures long-term prosperity. And we have to share that wealth properly among all of our people. Now, the White Paper sets out in detail how Scotland would become independent. It explains the choices that independence gives us. It addresses 650 reasonable questions which we've been asked, real people asking real questions. But ultimately, at the heart of this debate, there's only one question or one choice. Do we, the people who live and work in Scotland, believe that we are the best people to take the big decisions about our future? That question will be the subject of an impassioned and, I hope, a positive debate between now and next September. As First Minister, I want everyone, whatever their viewpoint, to play their part in thinking about the sort of country we wish to become, the Scotland we seek. I want people to consider the issues, to put forward opinions, to reach conclusions together. Because that's the most important thing about this referendum. It won't be decided by me, it won't be decided by our opponents, it won't be decided by the media. It will be decided by the people. Scotland's future is now in Scotland's hands.
Scotland's future is a forward-looking, ambitious and aspirational guide to the opportunities and benefits of independence. It is built on the simple but powerful belief that decisions about Scotland should be taken here in Scotland by the people who live and work here. It sets out the economic, social and democratic case for independence. It explains how, as a nation, we can make the journey from a yes vote in the referendum next September to taking our place as an independent member of the family of nations on the 24th of March 2016. It puts beyond any doubt that Scotland can afford to be independent and demonstrates how, with access to our own resources, we can take the decisions that will put our economy and our public finances on a strong and sustainable path for the future. It gives the answers to 650 detailed questions that have been asked of us about the opportunities and practicalities of independence. But most importantly of all, it sets out how we can use the powers of independence to transform our country. Independence is not just an end in itself, it is the means to building a wealthier and fairer Scotland. That's why Scotland's future illustrates, through a series of policy choices that this Scottish Government would make, how we can grow our economy faster and make our society fairer. At its heart is a proposal to transform childcare, to give children the best start in life and support more women to enter the workplace. This is a policy that will have a positive impact on the life chances of children and parents alike, create jobs and grow our economy. We would also call a halt to damaging Westminster policies that are pushing so many people into poverty, abolish the bedroom tax and ensure that the incomes of the lowest paid keep pace with the cost of living. We will ensure that pensions are paid on time and in full and that their value is protected over time with a commitment to the triple lock. We will take firm action to cut energy bills. We will ensure that our country has strong conventional defences, but that Trident nuclear weapons are removed as soon as is safely possible. Scotland's future also sets out the route by which we will make the seamless transition from being a member of the EU as part of the UK to becoming a fully independent member state with a seat at the top table and the ability to protect our national interests. Scotland's future is the most detailed blueprint for the independence of a country ever published. We want as many people in Scotland as possible to read it. It is reader-friendly and accessible. It's available online as an e-book in hard copy. Our message to the people of Scotland is this: take the opportunity to read Scotland's future. Compare it with the relentless negativity of the other side of this debate and make up your own mind. As of today, Scotland's future really is in Scotland's hands.
Thank you, Nicola. And now we're very open indeed to questions. Brian Taylor. I should say there's a microphone that will be coming round if you wait for the microphone.
First,
Brian.
Minister, thank you very much, Brian Taylor, BBC Scotland. Glancing at the document here, you say it's a blueprint for independence. Much of it is not deliverable either solely under independence or indeed by you. Much of it is policy that's post-election, and large sections, of course, are dependent upon other parties. With regard to the EU, you depend upon the cooperation of other EU members. With regard to NATO, ditto, other NATO members, and particularly with regard to the currency, you're dependent upon goodwill and cooperation from the remainder of the UK, which UK ministers are saying, as recently as this morning, is highly unlikely to emerge.
Whatever else you might say about this paper, it's not something you just take a glance at, Brian. It's pretty comprehensive. The format does two things. One, establishes the things that we will negotiate as the Scottish Government in the process of becoming independent, the starting position for an independent country in 2016. And secondly, you're right, it goes on to elucidate some of the policies that if the SNP were elected to that independent government, and it makes it clear and embraces that, of course, is a choice of the people of Scotland. The whole point of independence is choice. But the sort of priorities and policies we could pursue as an independent government if the SNP were to be chosen by the people, that I think is the correct format to put forward and take place. On some of the questions that you put forward, the arguments in terms of sterling and why we favour sterling as Scotland's currency are put forward in pages 109 to 117. The position on the European Union is put forward in page 221. We put forward a common sense position which is in the best interests of the people of Scotland and the people of the rest of the United Kingdom, rather in line, in fact, with the Edinburgh Agreement, which the Prime Minister and I signed last year in clause 30, which said that both governments should act in the best interests of the people. And we ask people to examine the arguments we put forward. We think they are the common sense, realistic proposition. Bernard.
Bernard Ponsonby, STV News. First Minister, back in 1997, there was a white paper which was put before the Scottish people based upon the Scottish Constitutional Convention scheme. People overwhelmingly voted yes for it, and the legislation upon which the current Parliament is based was very faithfully based upon that white paper. Now, you're asking people to vote yes based upon this white paper, but given that it's the subject of what is likely to be pretty protracted negotiations, isn't it the case that they may well vote yes because they like the scheme as outlined, but that's not the scheme that they get because negotiations require give and take? Isn't the status of this document not so much a white paper, but as your negotiating hand if you get a yes vote?
Well, I like you, Bernard, remember the 1997 referendum and was very much part of that. I actually think there's an exact analogy between the two processes, and that is people are being asked to vote on the basis of the white paper. If you think back to 1997, some people argued, of course, that you couldn't possibly do that, have a referendum based on a white paper, because it would be subject to a parliamentary process, and it could have been amended and changed, and a different scheme could have emerged in the debates in the House of Commons and the House of Lords, rather like what happened without a referendum back in the 1970s. Others argued, myself, Donald Dewar and the other people who were arguing for the white paper, is what mattered was to get the vote on the white paper and have that mandate from the Scottish people. And what transpired, of course, is once the democratic mandate had been secured, then the House of Commons and politicians accepted and followed the wishes of the people. So I think it's entirely reasonable to put forward the white paper as the common sense proposition to put forward the policies which will excite and capture the imagination of the people of Scotland, knowing that both in terms of the power of a democratic mandate, that is something which politicians are wise to acknowledge, and in particular, of course, the importance of the Edinburgh Agreement between the Scottish and UK governments, which says that both governments will accept the result and, of course, argue in the best interests of the people of Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom, as you would expect responsible governments and politicians to do after we've had the debate, had the arguments, and the people have delivered their verdict. Now we're open to another question. To the front, Channel 4. Since you had the microphone already,
Thank you very much. These are tough times. People are canny. They know there are pros and cons to every single decision they make in life. But we haven't had long to look at this, but I can't find many cons, many downsides. There must be some areas where there is greater risk in taking the route to independence. Will you be candid with people and tell them what those risks are?
Well, page 75 lays out what the starting position fiscally of an independent Scotland would be. And it also lays out what the perspective for the first budget in that independent Scotland might be if the SNP were chosen by the people into government. And it's not a spendthrift budget. Actually, it proposes an increase in expenditure of 600 million and a decrease in expenditure elsewhere, or a rise in taxation of 600 million. It sets that out in detail in page 75. It says the changes we could make within that constraint. That recognises that although the fiscal position of Scotland at that starting point is likely to be better than that of the United Kingdom, incidentally up to £600 a head better, but nonetheless we'll still be recovering from a severe economic recession. We'll still have a borrowing position which, better than the UK per head of population, is still a challenging position, and therefore the policies we're outlining as being capable of being pursued reflect that position. But there is a difference, is there not, in terms of the priorities which we would allocate and go forward with. In the priorities that we have, we don't foresee the requirement, the need or the sense in spending billions of pounds on weapons of mass destruction. And we see the sense and importance instead of investing in children and the future of childcare in Scotland and the growth and impetus that will give to the economy. We're making choices in the document. Ultimately, of course, the choice is with the people. Firstly, as to whether to grab the opportunity of becoming an independent country, and then to choose which government they want to pursue. But I think as you examine the document, Gary, you'll see that we make our choices, and in fact, one of the aspects of the case for independence is that we think these choices are more in line with the wishes of the people of Scotland than the choices that have been made for us by Westminster.
The only negative you associate is a legacy issue. Everything you do in the future, according to this document, appears to be win-win, milk and honey.
Well, I wouldn't argue that. What I would argue and accept, though, I think in terms of meeting Scotland's priorities, there is a strong logical case that a government chosen by the people of Scotland is more likely to reflect Scottish priorities than a government which is chosen by an electorate elsewhere. People get what they elect. And one of Scotland's greatest difficulties is the democratic deficit, where much of the time we vote in one direction and get a government which is pursuing policies in another direction. That is one of the essential democratic arguments for Scottish independence.
Border. You argue in this document that immigration into Scotland would be a good thing for the economy, and yet you also say there'll be no border controls. Surely those two things are incompatible.
No, I think as you examine the document, we examine the difference there have been, for example, in Irish immigration policy, Peter, compared to UK immigration policy. But of course we have a common travel area and have had for many, many decades between the United Kingdom and the Irish Republic. We actually argue for a green card system, which is similar to the system that the Irish Republic have pursued. I think there is a difference in attitude in terms of the importance, firstly, of providing the opportunity for skilled young Scots to work in their country if they choose to do so. Freedom of movement, of course, is one of the great assets of the modern world. But people should have the opportunity to deploy their skills in their own country if that's what they wish to do. But secondly, we don't have this negative view of the importance of skilled young people, many of whom we have educated in Scotland. Some of the 30,000 international students that we educate if they wish to come and work and contribute to the Scottish economy. That would be an extremely positive thing. And we want to break the cycle which otherwise awaits us of low growth, low population growth. We want to break that and break it decisively, and we set forward policies which will enable us to do that. Please.
Thank you very much. Chris Shipp from ITV News in Westminster, and I know I've been given an international media badge, which I thought was jumping the gun.
Well, we're nothing if not far-seeing in this government.
Could you just square a couple of circles for me, please, Mr. Salmon? You say quite clearly in your document there will be no requirement for an independent Scotland to raise the general rate of taxation, and yet, as you will well know, the Institute of Fiscal Studies last week said there would need to be an 8% increase in income tax. And I put it to you that one comes from an independent bunch of economists, one comes from the Scottish Government campaigning for independence. Secondly, just on pensions, you mention in your document that you'll look again at the raising the pension age to 67 because, to quote, Scots enjoy fewer years in receipt of state pensions, and yet you also say you're trying to look again at the issue of life expectancy and trying to reverse that decline. They don't both add up.
Well, can I take the first part, and then I'm going to ask Nicola Sturgeon, who was responsible for the pensions proposal and papers, to answer the second part of your question. The first part of the question is the IFS study looked forward to 2062 and what would happen and what would be required if Scotland were a low-growing economy with a low population growth and a sharp decline in the working-age population. We don't intend to accept that as our future. It might be the future if we stay under London government, but it's not the future we plan for an independent Scotland. In this document we put forward the growth policies, not just in population but in economic growth, which will allow us to have a different perspective. The IFS, taking the OBR figures, also assumed that it would only be residual oil and gas revenues after 2040. I think that may be surprising to the developers of the Kraken field just 2 weeks ago, because they're assuming production well into the 2040s. I don't think taking the OBR assumptions on oil and gas is particularly the best assumptions to take. But nonetheless, the key point is this: we look forward to a perspective where Scotland is a fast-growing economy that doesn't have a decline in its working-age population, that we can change these things by the policies that we put forward. And certainly in the years to 2062, that gives us a reasonable amount of time for this far-seeing government to move that position forward. Nicola, do you want to answer on pensions?
Indeed. As a devolved Scottish Government, we spend a great deal of time introducing measures that are designed to tackle Scotland's low, or relatively low life expectancy. Measures like action on alcohol, to reduce smoking. As an independent government, we would remain absolutely focused on dealing with that challenge. But as everybody knows, that takes time. The gap in life expectancy has been long-standing in Scotland, and it will take time to close that gap. Right now, Scots, on average, have a lower life expectancy than, on average, people in the rest of the UK do. Therefore, we question whether the rapid increase in the state pension age beyond 66 to 67 is right for Scotland. And remember, that is an increase that is now proposed on a much accelerated timescale. So we propose an expert commission to look at what the correct increase in the retirement age beyond 66 would be in Scotland, taking account of Scottish circumstances. It's one of the core arguments for independence, these decisions taken in Scotland based on the particular circumstances that we face. The general pensions issue, I think, is a good parallel to the general issue of how we grow the economy. Right now in Scotland, we spend less on social protection, including pensions, as a proportion of our economy than is the case across the UK as a whole. We have an ageing population. That's actually a good thing. We're not unique in having an ageing population. The big challenge for governments across the world is how we grow the working age population to support that ageing population in the future. And our argument reflected in this white paper is that we are far better able to do that with the economic and social powers that we have with independence.
On a personal note, can I just say that I look forward to 2062 in terms of life expectancy, so myself and the IFS can debate who was right and who was wrong by the time we get there.
The Independent. There's a lot of lawyers this morning who will be very happy indeed at the scale of work that you've just presented them to for the next years, I would think. If there's a yes vote, for instance, you've got one part on page 42, the share of the UK, share of national debt. This is a prime example. You're saying Scotland and the rest of the UK will agree a share of national debt. Indeed, but your view of national debt, the remainder of the UK's view of national debt are two different, they must be two different numbers. You're talking again about looking at the historic value of the UK and how that will be split up. These are protracted negotiations with absolutely no guarantee of outcome. Can you explain in detail, maybe a bit of detail, what you mean by that section?
Well, it's explained in the section itself, but we put forward parameters of either historic share of national debt, that's going back as far as we have records in terms of debt maturity, through the GERS figures, and that would be 3.9 billion in interest payments that we would have to take on, or a population share, which would be 5.5 billion. And the parameters on page 75 give the outcome in both of these eventualities. Both result, incidentally, in us having a lower share of debt to GDP than the UK as a whole, because our GDP will be higher. But we give both parameters among the other variances, and each result in a stronger fiscal position expected in 2016-17 than that would pertain for the UK. But that's why we ran the parameters, because it gives a view of both positions, and the figures are contained in that section. I've been told. Well, can I just say that the 18 months which we've set forward for negotiations, I think you'll find that two things. One, a number of experts, and I would particularly pick out Professor James Crawford of Cambridge University, because he was chosen by the UK government as their legal expert, described that timescale, and I quote, as realistic. We could also take Professor Robert Hazel from just this week, who said it was a perfectly reasonable time frame. And the reason that they would say that is, of course, if you take the average timescale of countries which have become independent, and we're talking about 30 examples here since the Second World War following a referendum, then the average timescale between the referendum and the date of independence has been 18 months, which is why that's generally considered as a reasonable timescale. And all of these countries, or in many cases, have had exactly these same issues to look at, and have managed to do it. Now, the UK and the Scottish governments, we We represent sophisticated electorates in modern democracy. I think, as the Edinburgh Agreement indicated, we are well able to act once the result is in and the posturing stops and the politics stops. That politicians get down to following the instruction of the people and acting in the best interests of the respective electorate. Clause 30 in the Edinburgh Agreement. Now, Nicola's whispered to me that Nick Robinson wants to say a word, so I think we should follow Nicola's instructions and allow you to say a word, Nick.
Hopefully he does now.
Just a question. Thank you very much indeed. Nick Robinson, BBC News. The document today asserts that an independent Scotland will keep the pound, will stay in the EU, and that Scots viewers will be able to watch Strictly Come Dancing. Wouldn't it be more honest to voters to add words like perhaps, maybe, fingers crossed and hope for the best? Or maybe the document should say, if the UK Treasury agrees, if the Bank of England agrees, if 27 EU member states agree, if the BBC Trust agree, if a long, long list of other organisations see the future in the same way as you, maybe, just perhaps, fingers crossed, things will stay as they are.
Well, let's take what is overwhelmingly the most important of these examples you've given, the BBC and Strictly Come Dancing. Could we remember that Scotland's entitled to a share of assets of the UK, as long as the BBC remains in public hands, which we hope would be for a long time to come, Nick, then we're entitled. We have a share of the assets of the BBC. We put forward a perfectly reasonable and workable proposition. Last week in Scotland there was some debate from the No campaign, who was suggesting that an independent Scotland wouldn't have the joys of watching the Doctor Who anniversary episode on Saturday. A scare story which ran, I think, for a few hours until people realised it was being simultaneously broadcast in 80 countries around the world. I suspect even the No campaign will find it difficult to sustain an argument that the only country in the world which wouldn't have access to something like Doctor Who would be Scotland. So in a situation where it's part of the assets of Scotland, we put forward a very workable, reasonable and sensible proposition in terms of broadcasting policy for an independent Scotland, how that relates to the BBC, and I think people will judge that on its merits. As far as currency is concerned, then I would reflect the point I said to Brian Taylor. We argue in pages 109 to 117 that it's in the joint interests of Scotland and the United Kingdom. England is our biggest trading partner. Scotland is England's second biggest trading partner. Scottish assets are worth, well, oil and gas alone is worth 39 billion to the sterling balance of payments. It would leave rather a large hole if it wasn't there to support sterling. And thirdly, you come to the essential point about assets and liabilities. The Bank of England sterling is part of the assets. They're as much Scotland's assets as London's assets. They're certainly not George Osborne's assets. We put forward in this paper our willingness to accept liabilities. We also are entitled to a share of assets. And for all of these reasons, that's probably why the leader of the No campaign, Alistair Darling, earlier this year, described the sterling area as logical and desirable. So if we're negotiating with people who think it's logical and desirable, then presumably we'll come to a logical and desirable outcome. As far as the EU is concerned, you'll find that in passages in pages 221. And what we bring forward is in line with the advice from the law officers, that we put forward a position based on Article 48, that's a continuity of effect, and how that can be agreed by common accord. And I would refer you again to the view of the experts that I noted, who, talking in particular about international negotiations, said that 18 months was a perfectly reasonable timescale. Now,
sorry, and briefly, my key point was you don't have in a very long document anywhere that says perhaps, maybe, if we get our way, if lots of other people agree. You assert that things will happen. I quote the word will repeatedly in relation to the pound. I put it to you, you don't know whether it will happen. You hope it will happen. And you may be proved wrong.
Well, you find on page 373 a note which sets the context of that and talks about the questions and answers that we give. And I'll find you you'll find from that we put forward a logical platform and arguments. Whether our arguments are strong and reasonable and logical, the people will judge. They'll judge from this white paper. That's what the referendum is about. They'll look at the yes case, the positive case, the reasonable case we're making for Scottish independence, the advantage that will give, and they'll judge that against the no campaign and the cries of doom and gloom and negativity they'll see from that particular quarter. How people will estimate that we'll see over the next few months. My view in politics is people will vote for a positive vision, especially one which is based on reason and common sense, as this one undoubtedly is.
Trident Daily Record. First Minister, one of the big eye-catching policies is a commitment to free childcare for all preschool children, over 1,100 hours virtually. Every child in Scotland would get free childcare. It would transform Scotland, you say. Do you need independence to achieve that? If it's a priority, can't you just deliver it through the Scottish Parliament? And how much would it cost? And the big question every voter wants to know is, how much will independence cost me? Is there an answer to that in the White Paper?
Can I ask Nicola to answer on childcare, and then I'll pick up the very last point you make?
The whole point of the transformational childcare policy that's in this white paper is not just to make sure that we're giving children the best start in life, but as I indicated in my opening remarks, to ensure that we support women into the workplace. Our female participation rate in the workplace is higher than the UK as a whole, but lower than many comparable European countries. So as we get more women into the workplace, they generate tax revenues and help to grow the economy. That's the point of the policy. Why can we not do that now? Because if we did that now, then the increased revenues from that would flow straight to the UK Treasury rather than staying here in Scotland to help us fund that policy and make sure that we support it properly. So that's why we need the powers, the full economic powers of independence to do that. We set out in part 2 of the document the phased way in which we would introduce that policy in the context of the sound public finances that are laid out in that part of the document. So it's a sound policy, one that is designed to support women into the workplace, to make it easier for women in particular, but parents generally, to work. I mean, if we were to match, as an example, the female participation rate of a country like Sweden, for example, we'd see over time increased tax revenues in the region of £700 million per year. So it's a dual purpose policy, good for our youngest children and good for parents, particularly women.
And the answer to the second part of your question, Torkel, we can look over the last 5 years where the figures are in, the jury's in, and we can agree. And the relative position between Scotland and the UK is that each Scot would have been £2,400 better off if we'd controlled our own finances over the last 5 years, and that's the GERS figures, and there's no dispute about it. On page 75, we give the projections for the first year of independence. And what these show in terms of our lower, better relative position in the UK in 2016-17, that the advantage for each Scot would be £600, up to £600. The real issue is, however, not what's happened over the last 5 years. That's an illustration and an important one to make. It's not even the starting point. The real issue is what you do with that starting point, how you use that ability to transform the economy. It doesn't give you untrammeled or unlimited scope, but it does give you a strong starting position. But Scotland will succeed or fail on the basis of the sense and vision of the policies that are put forward. And the policy in childcare is one of the policies which could transform Scotland and transform it for the better. And whether it's a key spending commitment like childcare, or whether it's a taxation cut like, for example, air passenger duty, these things become doable and affordable if you have the benefits and revenue benefits from the growth that result in the economy, either in the female participation in the workforce from childcare, or from more tourism and more visitor numbers and increased revenues elsewhere from a cut in air passenger duty. You need to control both sides of the balance sheet if you have the ability to pursue such policies. Please.
Hamish MacDonald from The Times. I'm going to follow up on Peter's point that he made about border controls. On page 500, it says quite clearly there would be no border controls erected. And then on the very following point, it says that there will be a Scottish Borders and Migration Service which will have responsibility for ensuring that only those who have a right to enter Scotland do so. How do you enforce that without any border controls at all?
No, we're talking about, the first point is no border controls between Scotland and England and the Republic of Ireland and the Isle of Man and Guernsey and Jersey, the common travel area. The second point is right, the Irish Republic, the Isle of Man, Guernsey, Jersey, Scotland and England. You have a border agency to control migration from out with the common travel area. So the first one applies to no border controls within the common travel area, and the second one applies to people coming in from out with the common travel area. That's the point of having the common travel area. Please, back. Lady at the back.
Ritala Shah, The World Tonight on Radio 4. On questions like childcare and pensions, these are just policies. They're reversible policies by a different government in the future. Are they really reasons to vote for independence, which is a very momentous decision and presumably irreversible?
Well, I think it's a very important question, and addressing what we were doing in the white paper, we don't just admit this, we embrace that concept. I think it's improper and legitimate to put forward how the current SNP government, the government elected and trusted by the people, will approach this issue to take Scotland first to a decision on independence and then to Independence Day in 2016, and that we've done in the paper. And then we say it and we make it absolutely clear that this is a choice for the people. But in order to say why independence, why is it worth having a constitutional change, then it's important to draw attention to the sort of things we could and should do differently in an independent Scotland. And therefore that takes us into the policy programme that the SNP would like to. No, we don't do it in the same way as a manifesto. We pick certain issues and say these are key issues where we can develop policy differently. But we do that and we don't just accept, we embrace the point that the key point here is one of choice. But unless we're independent, we won't have the ability to make these choices. Now, we put forward what we think is an exciting programme for the people of Scotland, but we accept and acknowledge, of course, that it's for the people of Scotland to decide who governs an independent country. But that essence of choice, as we point out, running through like a tartan thread through this document, pointing out that the choice of who governs each and every election in an independent Scotland, people will end up with the government they vote for. That hasn't been the case or our experience within the United Kingdom. Sev.
Seven Carell at The Guardian. First Minister, it's really useful to see the great detail that's devoted in the document to EU membership and the discussion of Article 48 and 49. But has the Scottish Government had any conversations with other EU member states where those member states have agreed with that analysis and said, yes, we would agree to have a discussion and a debate under Article 49 terms?
Well, it's Article 48, Sev. That's the point that's made in page 221. And that follows consistent with the advice being given by the Lord Advocate, and that's why we've put it forward in some detail. In terms of negotiations at the present moment, as you know, our position is we're very happy to enter talks with the European Commission, but it's been made clear these talks have to be initiated by the member state, i.e. the UK. The UK government doesn't want to do that. But again, we put forward something consistent with the advice of our law officers. We think it's an important proposition. As you'll read it, you'll see the continuity of effect and the common accord provisions. We think it's a good and positive position to put forward, and that's what's contained in the document, Sev. I know you're anxious to come. I'm not going to stop you coming back, Sev. Okay, on you go. Well, there have been, as you rightly say, lots of discussions. We put forward a proposition believing that there'll be enthusiasm for Scotland's membership of the European Union. We certainly haven't had anything to the contrary, and the International Affairs Secretary will be conducting discussions with a range of representatives from consulates tomorrow, I think it is, and no doubt we might have more to say then. But nonetheless, we put forward the proposition, we put forward the route map. We believe that Scotland will be a welcome member of the European Union. We think the timetable for doing it is realistic, to quote Professor James Crawford, and we put it forward on that basis. Robbie.
Sorry, Robbie Dinwiddie from the Herald. You mention a lot page 221, but the following page you concede that there will need to be negotiations, even under your vision, of detailed considerations around opt-outs, in particular the rebate, the Eurozone, justice and home affairs, and the Schengen travel area. So if these difficult negotiations lie ahead, how can you be so confident they'll come out the way you want?
Well, the arguments are contained in that section. I mean, if we take just one of the arguments on the euro, for example, we point out that membership of the European Monetary System, the 2-year membership, is a voluntary engagement by any country, since we have no wish to join the euro. Therefore, we volunteer not to do that. I mean, that's a similar position that Sweden has at the present moment, Robbie, and we put forward the arguments why we do not believe, and I don't think anybody actually seriously believes, that Scotland could be forced into the euro area, and therefore the other choices we put forward for the currency position, that is, we retain sterling as a currency, is the argument that we put forward. The argument stands there, Robbie. We put forward a common sense position based on a legal means of giving effect through continuity of effect and through the common accord. We've every reason to believe that has wide support and wide acceptance. Nicola, do you want to add something?
Well, I mean, I think the key thing about the European point is that we would not be seeking any new arrangements for Scotland, in the sense that we are not in the euro currently, we're not in Schengen currently. That's the whole basis of the continuity of effect argument. We're seeking to make the transition from being a member as part of the UK to being an independent member state on the same terms as we're currently a member as part of the UK. That's what we mean by continuity of effect.
Of course, it is true to say, Robbie, there is a great deal of uncertainty about the European position. And that uncertainty comes from Westminster and the potential prospect of an in-out referendum as early as 2017. Now, that is real uncertainty. We put forward the position of a country which wants to be part of the European structure, which we think will be enthusiastically received into European structure. The result will be we'll become a member of that of the European Union. A government and a country which may or may not wish to be part of the European structure, as Westminster at the present moment, then of course that outcome by definition is much, much more uncertain. Now, the Daily Telegraph. I see Alan Cochrane complaining. Should I have reflected your seniority, Alan? Sorry. What, do you want to defer to your senior colleague? No, obviously not.
Telegraph. I just wanted to check, is it your position that Scots will keep the pound regardless of whether the remainder of the UK decides to join a currency union?
So, right, you're talking about the sterling area. No, our position set out, Simon, on page 100, 917. It rests on what's in the joint interests of Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. It points out the massive hole in the sterling balance of payments of Scottish oil and gas weren't to be there. It points out that sterling and indeed the Bank of England are part of the assets to which we will be entitled to a share of, and it points out, as we do in page 75, that we're willing to accept a share of liabilities, but of course we have to have a share of the assets as well. So that's the strength of our position. Do you want a follow-up, Alan?
That, which you've already referred to, both governments agree to work in the best interests of all peoples. You can fairly say, and I might even agree with you, that you can say what's best for Scotland. Well, what gives you the right to say what's best for what's left of the UK, England, Northern Ireland and Wales, where the First Minister's already said he doesn't want Scotland to share in a currency union?
Well, the First Minister of Wales said less than a month ago to the Welsh National Assembly that he couldn't think of a single advantage for Wales in the devolved framework. So there may be or couldn't provide an argument for devolution. So we can leave that aspect to rest. But the point is, we're putting forward an objective position of why a sterling area is not just in the best interests of Scotland, but the best interests of the rest of the United Kingdom. And that's based, Alan, on the points that we've made, that while it's true, of course, that the rest of the UK is Scotland's largest trading partner, it's also true that Scotland is the second largest trading partner. It is very much true that there would be a massive hole in the sterling balance of payments, which are not in a condition that they can withstand a massive hole if Scottish oil and gas weren't part of the exports. And it's also true that it's a question of assets and liabilities, that we accept that we have an obligation to take on the financing of a part of the liabilities that will be built up by Alistair Darling and George Osborne over these last few years. But we are entitled to a share of the assets, and among the assets is the currency and the Bank of England, which was, I'm sure, against the wishes of the Daily Telegraph, nationalised some time ago.
Hello. Connie McLaughlin of Real Radio. First Minister, you say that Scotland would take its place as one of the many non-nuclear members of NATO. Have you had assurances of that, and if not, is there a plan B?
Well, the assurances are based on the fact that 25 of the current 28 members of NATO are not nuclear powers, that 20 out of the 28 do not have nuclear weapons positioned on the soil. Again, we ask for no special arrangements for Scotland, just the arrangements that are accepted for other NATO countries. Why do we think Scotland would be welcomed into NATO? It's the North Atlantic Treaty Organisation. It would have a slight difficulty if a large part of the territorial area of the North Atlantic weren't part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organisation, which is why we put forward a reasonable position to be part of the NATO framework. Do you want to follow up?
Most of our listeners, and we've found that most people coming to radio and asking us the question, the biggest question that we're finding is, it's all great and well what's detailed in this white paper, but why should people trust you to deliver?
Well, two answers I would give to that. One is that we started as a minority government in 2007, and because people trusted us, we were elected as a majority government in 2011. That wasn't accidental. That's because people looked at what we had delivered, looked at our track record, and decided to invest that confidence in us, including the proposition to go forward with a referendum on independence for Scotland, again, something which we've delivered. So what we do in terms of this white paper is we lay out a perspective for Scotland's future. We ask, and people have many, many opportunities, not just in reading the whole thing, but in the summary version and the variety of electronic forms that Nicola has detailed. We ask and hope that as many people as possible not just read the document, read the arguments, but take part in the debate on Real Radio and elsewhere, and come to a conclusion about the prospects of this country, and wonder if we could do better if we matched the fantastic natural resources and people of this country, brought that together to create a better, exciting future than what lies before us if we stay under Westminster control. Now, in all of the 670 plus pages of this document, we put forward a positive case for Scottish independence. But I think in page 60 and 61, I think it is, we do say what happens if there was a no vote. And what happens if there is a no vote, relevant to your question, will be stuck with Trident, would be potentially stuck with the bedroom tax. We'll see Scottish public spending substantially reduced, as each and every Westminster party has indicated they would like to do. The EU membership will be very substantially in doubt, depending on the outcome of the next UK election, and there is no guarantee from any of the No campaign or any idea or perspective of what powers that they would offer as an alternative to Scottish independence. Now, that's a kind of bleak pages 60 and 61, so I'm glad that the other 270 or so pages of the document are so uplifting and exciting.
Hello. Hi, I'm Mike Small from Bella Caledonia. A lot of people see this as essentially a process towards a new democracy. We've had a parliament before, and now we need a democracy. I wonder if you can tell us something about the plans for a written constitution and the process towards that.
Which are detailed in the document, Mike, but a summary would be this, that we see a two-stage process. Firstly, what we describe as a platform constitution, which is basically to take the Parliament, government, the electoral system, the division of powers within judiciary and Parliament that we have at the present moment, the acceptance of the European Convention, which of course is part of the Scotland Act at the present moment, and run that forward to be the platform constitution where Her Majesty the Queen is head of state. All that's detailed in the document. We then envisage a constitutional convention, looking at some of the international experience, and we quote a number of examples, particularly Iceland, for example, in the last few years, of how countries have reinvigorated themselves by the exciting process of framework of a written constitution. We think that Scotland should have a written constitution, and that would be joining every other member of the European Union, and I think every other member of the Commonwealth as well, in having a written document, a written constitution. And we give some ideas as to what that written constitution might envisage, accepting, of course, that would be the duty of the Constitutional Convention. So we put forward a platform constitution to take us through independence, through the first elections to that independent Scottish Parliament, and envisage that process of constitutional renewal and the production of a written constitution, which has been the subject and the cause of debate and discussion for many, many years. And through an independent Scotland, we can bring that to reality. At the back.
5 Live. Isn't it the case that if there was a governance arrangement with the Bank of England, Scotland still wouldn't get the interest rates that suit it because it would be outvoted in that arrangement?
Well, one of the arguments that you probably saw in the Fiscal Commission paper, our position on sterling is based on the work of the Fiscal Commission Working Group, a group of eminent economists, including 2 Nobel laureates, Jim Mirrlees and Joe Stiglitz, which put forward the reasons why a sterling area would work in the best interest of Scotland and the rest of the UK. Now, I've talked about trade relationships, but of course one of the arguments is that currently Scottish productivity is identical to the UK average. Scottish unemployment is slightly lower than the UK average. Our employment is higher than the UK average. Our labour participation is higher than the UK average. These are things which haven't always been the case in Scotland, but these are things we've established over the last few years. Therefore, the conduct of monetary policy over an area where productivity is identical is one of the arguments contained within the Fiscal Commission Working Group. That's why we think a sterling area would work. If I was First Minister of, let's say, Wales, for example, where unemployment is substantially higher than the rest of the UK, then of course there would be more of a concern, because if the Bank of England followed the argument of raising interest rates when, for example, employment went down to 7% across the UK, it's possible that unemployment in Wales might be higher than that. So you could see an argument in terms of where monetary policy might be unsuitable for Wales. But in a position where, when that happens for the UK, Scottish unemployment is likely in current trends to also be below 7%, where our productivity is identical. That makes the argument for an optimal currency area, which put forward the arguments why the trade reasons and the logical joint mutual enlightened self-interest would take you in that direction.
The need to set its own interest rates?
Well, we take from the productivity, from the trends in the economy, that the advantages of having the same currency as your major trading partner for Scotland and your second major trading partner for the rest of the United Kingdom gives mutual benefit, which provides the argument behind the sterling area. That's why it's in the best interests of Scotland and the best interests of the rest of the United Kingdom. Now, let's see, who hasn't had this lady here.
Hello. Hello, yes, Belinda Goldsmith from Reuters. Going on to that, though, the paper very much depends on the acceptance of sterling. Is this a deal breaker if you can't get approval? And also, will it weaken your negotiation position? And secondly, on passports, what will this mean for 3rd, 4th generation Scots living all over the world on their applications for Scottish citizenship?
Well, on the first one, our arguments on the currency are put forward in pages 109 to 117. They are very, very powerful arguments. Not to have acceptance of them would depend on not the UK government not being prepared to act in Scotland's best interests, but not being prepared to act in the best interests of the rest of the United Kingdom. And as we've already discussed, in Section 30 of the Edinburgh Agreement. Both governments said that they would act in the best interests of the people of Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom, which is why we put forward the argument in these strong terms. In terms of citizenship, Nicola, do you want to pick that up?
Of course, yeah. I was going to refer you to a table that's usefully set out at page 496, which gives different categories of people and their citizenship status in an independent Scotland. So, for example, British citizens habitually resident in Scotland on day one of independence, or British citizens born in Scotland but living outside of Scotland at the point of independence would automatically be Scottish citizens. There would be other categories of people who would have the right to apply to be Scottish citizens. So citizens of any country who have a parent or grandparent who qualifies for Scottish citizenship can register as a Scottish citizen going through due process. But that information is all set out in the table on page 496.
Now, I'm going to take two groups of three so that we can get through a few more. Peter first, and then.
From The Economist. As you say, you've set out very strong arguments for Scotland being part of a sterling zone, sharing it with the rest of the UK. However, the White Paper then adds a paragraph which doesn't appear to be reflected or echoed elsewhere in the paper on other topics, in which it says that it is possible that indeed it would be open to the Scottish people in the future to choose a different currency arrangement. Isn't this your get-out clause reflective of the fact that it is possible the UK government, for whatever reason you're unable to fathom, but a reason nonetheless, might not accept Scotland as part of the sterling zone, and that there is considerable disquiet, let's put it that way, amongst supporters of independence about the wisdom of a sterling currency zone?
Lee, please. Magnus. Okay, and third question.
The summary. On debt, you talk about offsetting part of our share of UK assets against the debt we agree to take on from the UK. Could you be more specific about what those assets are, and do they include oil, for example?
Okay. First one, Peter, I'm sorry, page 10 or X in the preface, you'll see a list of things, including NATO, European membership, the Republic, where we acknowledge that the people of Scotland, for that matter, the people of the UK, when particularly pertinent with regard to Europe at the present moment, can choose a different policy if they choose to do so. So no, it wasn't a point we were just making about the sterling zone. It's a point we make in my introduction. And that is about acknowledging the point I made to the lady, I think it was from Radio 5 Live, that we don't just acknowledge this, we embrace the point that people in an independent Scotland are entitled to make different choices. That's one of the entire points about being independent. Nicola, on citizenship and voting.
I was just going to refer Magnus to, I think it's question 617 of the 650 questions, who would have voting rights after independence. We're proposing a franchise the same as the franchise that currently exists for the Scottish Parliament, but we make the point that the Constitutional Convention, which would be established to draw up the written constitution, would be able to look in detail at the franchise and whether there should be any changes to the franchise in the future.
Now, the question on assets, I mean, certain assets are territorial, and these are obvious and easy, including, for example, oil and gas resources. Other assets are non-territorial. For example, the UK Embassy in Paris would be a good example. It may or may not be a good idea to have 8.3% of the UK Embassy in Paris. If it wasn't a good idea to have it, then you would offset it against other liabilities like the share of financing of the national debt. So it applies to that category, and there are a lot of them, incidentally, of non-territorial assets. Now, I'll take another three questions, and then we'll see how we proceed from there. Just gentleman at the front, please.
David Clegg from the Daily Record. Can I ask you about Trident? As far as I can see from here, it says removing Trident would be a priority, would be with a view to the removal of Trident within the first term of the Scottish Parliament following independence, which would be 2021 by my calculations. How realistic do you think that is, and can you outline what the process would be?
Okay. Gentleman at the back, at the corner, yeah.
Nick Watt from The Guardian. First Minister, you said you're confident that you wouldn't have to join the euro, but every single country that's joined the EU since the Maastricht Treaty has been obliged, under the terms of their accession treaty, to agree to join the euro if they meet the Maastricht criteria, and that includes Sweden, and the only reason they're not in the euro is because they voted no in a referendum. What makes you confident that you wouldn't have to put that in your accession treaty, given that the European Commission's view is that a yes vote would not lead to the collapse of the United Kingdom, it would lead to you leaving the United Kingdom, so you'd have to sign an accession treaty?
And the gentleman next door.
From BBC News now. All your opponents have to do is ask awkward questions, lots and lots of awkward questions, and there's some answers that you can't definitively provide. Do you ever look in the mirror and think, we're going to run out of time here?
Could we have Trident first, and then I'll talk about my looking in the mirror or not.
This is detailed in question 315 in the Q&A section. I mean, our position on Trident, I think, is well known, certainly long-standing, and it's well understood. We want to see the speediest, safe removal of Trident from the Clyde. We set out in the white paper that our position would be with a view to having Trident removed within the first term of the independent Parliament. CND, as you will be familiar with, produced a report showing that could practically be done within a timescale of about 2 years. Obviously, that would be a matter of negotiation in terms of the process and the precise timescale, but our very, very firm position is as quickly as is safely possible within the first term of the Scottish Parliament being our aim and intention. And one of the key benefits, one of the many key benefits of independence is that we get to make that choice, that we get to decide not to spend billions of pounds on weapons of mass destruction that nobody wants or is able to use, and invest that money on, for example, the childcare policy that we were discussing earlier on. So the position is set out very clearly as an issue of principle for this government, and we want to see that removal as quickly as is safely possible. Obviously, when you're talking about nuclear weapons, the safety is also of paramount importance.
And can I say to the gentleman from The Guardian, you rather make my point for me. There was a point during one of the European summits, I think it was last December, where David Cameron declared, of course, that lots of countries wouldn't join the euro, not just those with a formal opt-out like the UK and Denmark, but many other countries wouldn't join either. And the reason for that, of course, is it's obligatory to be in the European monetary system for 2 years before you can have euro entry, but it's voluntary as to whether you join the European monetary system. And when you say the only reason that Sweden decided not to join the euro is people voted in a referendum not to join, that actually makes the point. And the idea that euro membership is compulsory is completely wrong for these reasons, and that we outline in the white paper. And incidentally, I think that's one of the kind of canards which the No campaign were running for a while in this debate and have largely dropped since. And as far as finally looking in the mirror is concerned, well, what I think is, if you're in a political argument and debate, would you rather be in the positive side of the argument, outlining your vision for the future of the country, or do you want to be in a negative side of the argument, embraced in a deadly embrace with the Liberals, the Conservatives and the Labour leadership all together, pointing out all the dreadful things they think will befall Scotland if we become an independent country. And my view in politics is that the positive beats the negative, and if you've got a vision for the future, then that's the right ground to be on if you want to win either an election or a referendum. So looking in the mirror or not, we're on the yes side of this campaign, the positive side of this argument, and we will win this referendum. Now, I suggest 3 more questions, and then we'll call to a close. The Sunday Herald first, and then Andy.
Hi there, Tom Gordon from the Sunday Herald. Just to press you on the childcare policy, what is the specific cost of this policy? What's the number attached to it?
Okay, thank you. Andy?
The document says you've had meetings with NATO representatives. Have they told you you'll be welcome?
Okay. And the third question, this gentleman here.
Michael Blackley at the Mail on Sunday. Given the level of negotiations that are required, can you actually give a cast iron guarantee to voters before the referendum that they will use the pound in an independent Scotland and there won't be border posts with the rest of the UK?
First question on childcare. Nicola, do you want to pick that up?
We're already, of course, investing in the here and now and increasing the amount of childcare that is available. We set out a staged process in the White Paper. In our first budget, we would allocate an additional £100 million. By the end of the first Parliament, the additional cost of that policy would be in the region of £600 million. But I would emphasise the point I made, I can't remember who I made it to earlier on, that this is a policy that is designed, as well as to help children and give them the best start in life, it is designed to get more women into the workforce, which obviously increases economic growth and the tax revenues that flow from that. So this is a policy that is designed to generate income as well as obviously a policy that costs. I should say, and this is also a fact pointed out in the document itself, this is a policy that would create jobs in the childcare industry. Around 35,000 jobs would be created by virtue of implementing this policy.
Andy, you're quite right. There have been discussions with NATO representatives. We meet the criteria and will meet the criteria for NATO membership. We believe on that basis we'll be a welcome member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organisation. Michael, what I can say to you is we're in favour of the common travel area. We're in favour of keeping the pound. And I know that during the campaign, the Daily Mail, with its judicious look at politics, may say a number of things. But once the campaign is over, and once the yes side have won, and once Scotland's becoming an independent country, I know that we'll have the most fantastic support from the Daily Mail about not having border controls in these islands, no more than we have border controls between here and the Republic of Ireland. And I absolutely am convinced that the Daily Mail will be leading the Keep the Pound campaign in these circumstances. So yes, we'll keep the pound and we won't have border controls. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in Parliance of Glasgow, I think we've had a fair kick at the ball, both us and you. Can I thank you very much for your attendance, and I look forward to the next few months of many more questions to address and the answers given by the Scottish people next September. Thank you very much.